I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. What is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention.
Police got a chokehold they use out here, though, man. They choke niggas to death. That mean you be dead when they through. Right? Did you know that? Wait, the niggas going, yeah, we know wife. No, I had no idea. Yeah, two grab your legs, one grab your head, it'll snap. Oh, shit, he broke. Can you break a nigger? Is it okay? Let's check the menu. Yep, page 8, you can break a nigger right there. See? Let's drag him downtown. Okay.
Did you know that hypertension and heart disease kill more blacks than anything else in America?
I didn't know that. I thought it was the police.
Out of tragedy, we sometimes have to laugh to keep from crying. Welcome, everybody. Episode 42, right now, Stir Crazy, the Real News Network. I'm your host, Kim Brown. A riot is the language of the unheard, and we have seen that happen firsthand this time in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as people have been taking to the streets forcefully, vehemently, intentionally, sometimes violently, but sometimes that's the only language they understand, right? I'm your host, Kim Brown. Coming up today, we're going to be talking about the aftermath of the police murder of Mr. Floyd. It has been another tragedy that has happened again at the hands of police. Unclear whether or not any charges are going to be filed against these cops, but the people in the streets are demanding justice. They're not asking for it. They're not waiting around for it. They are going to burn the shit down until they get it. And at this point, really, who can blame them? Listen, also coming up this hour, when we get to it, Donald Trump is already trying to muddy the waters for the election for November. He's already calling shenanigans on mail-in voting. He's already saying that the chances of voter fraud because of mail-in absentee ballots or mail-in ballots is a thing. And that's going to be a problem really for all of us. But we're going to get to that a little bit later. Right now, it's time to bring in our panel, okay? I want y'all to be our panelists also, everyone in the comments and in the chat. This is a real somber time. And I'm feeling, the drainage emotionally of it. But enough. We aren't here to talk about me. Let's get to the panel. Bringing in everybody here to give their fantastic perspectives. We'd like to welcome Neill Franklin. Neill is the Executive Director for the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. Of course, we have fan favorite Jacqueline Luqman, co-host of the radio show By Any Means Necessary, also host and producer here at The Real News. And Andrew Corkery, our visual research producer here at The Real News. But Andrew comes with well-researched facts and opinions and panel. I'd like to welcome y'all today. Maybe you guys are feeling the same way I'm feeling, a little bit emotionally drained, a little tired, exhausted because we are in this same cycle once again where law enforcement has taken the life of an unarmed Black person. George Floyd was killed by police on tape, again, recorded by bystanders for allegedly trying to pass a fake $20 bill. So I guess police felt that that was a reason to put a knee on his neck for a duration of several minutes. So the first place we're going to start is what we have been seeing happening in the streets. Let's take a look at what happened at the Target in Minneapolis, where a lot of protesters busted into Target, took everything out the Target. I saw some photos on social media. That Target was picked clean to the mug, baby. And you know what? Big corporations have been looting us not only for pretty much our whole lives, but we know in the first 2 quarters of this year, because of the pandemic, billionaires, Amazon, Walmart made money hand over fist, billions and billions of dollars. So who are the real looters? Jacqueline Luqman, I want to go to you first because, first of all, I know you have some very strong feelings about this, but the fact that people in Minneapolis said basically, we are sick of this shit. We're not taking this right now. And we are willing to take to the streets and make our voices loud and clear. What's your take on what's been happening in Minneapolis and other cities as well?
Well, I mean, people are surprised because they haven't been paying attention. People are shocked because they haven't been paying attention. And as far as Target is concerned, here's the first cuss word of the show. Fuck Target, for real. Listen, Target itself has an issue with its own employees in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic with prioritizing the ridiculous, silly needs of shoppers that don't want to wear masks by telling the employees that in order not to freak the shoppers out, that the employees shouldn't wear masks. And the employees have been organizing and rising up against their own employer, Target, to protect themselves. So entirely fuck Target. So if some people walk into Target and they come out with, I don't know, groceries, some Pampers, a TV, fabulous, because Target underpays its workers. They do not protect their workers. They're eligible for the government's multi-billion-dollar paycheck protection program, I'm sure. So it's a corporation. And this government has already given corporations over $6 trillion in relief, in some kind of relief. You and me, regular folks, those people in Minneapolis, got one check for $1,200. That's supposed to last them. Now it's been 2 months. Fuck Target and fuck every other corporation that feels like they're being abused by a bunch of rioters and looters. We're the ones who have been looted. But the reason these uprisings are happening it's happened in Minneapolis, it's happening in LA right now. I've heard that it's happening in Chicago. Chicago shouldn't be a surprise to anybody with their horrendous police department. But the reason it's happening is because police violence against communities of color, Black people, Latinos, Native people has been ongoing. And just in the past few days, a Chicano man, a 60-year-old Chicano man, was shot in his own driveway by LA cops. That's why there's an uprising going on there now. I'm not sure what happened in Chicago, but I'm sure it was something along the same lines. And let's remember that in Minneapolis, 4 years ago, Philando Castile was murdered by a cop, and that cop was let off. How people are surprised that the injustices that communities of color continue to experience at the hands of law enforcement, enabled by politicians, how people don't expect people to just not take this shit anymore. I don't know what you were expecting. I really don't know what people were expecting to happen.
Neill Franklin, I want us to play a clip from the mayor of Minneapolis. His name is Jacob Frey. I have not heard a politician talk like this, especially not a white politician. And I want to get your reaction to statements he made at a press conference yesterday. Let's check it out.
Why is the man who killed George Floyd not in jail? If you had done it, or I had done it, we would be behind bars right now. And I cannot come up with a good answer to that question. And so I'm calling on Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman to act on the evidence before him. I'm calling on him to charge the arresting officer in this case. We cannot turn a blind eye. It is on us as leaders to see this for what it is and call it what it is. George Floyd deserves justice. His family deserves justice. The black community deserves justice. And our city deserves justice.
Neill Franklin, normally when we see these types of incidents where an unarmed black person is shot and killed by police, or just killed by police, I mean, Freddie Gray wasn't shot, but he did die at the hands of Baltimore City Police. It's usually some sort of version of a rigmarole of, you know, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're calling on an investigation. Now we're asking for outside help or something like along those lines. But this individual, this mayor, is calling for these cops to be in jail, at least the cop who had his knee on the neck of George Floyd. What is your take about how this mayor is reacting, and perhaps what reaction will he get from the police in his city?
Well, personally, I could care what the police in Minneapolis think about it. And we're talking about the police union, you know, here. Police chief already did what he could do immediately, and that was to fire all four. Now, this is something we typically don't see so quickly, not just to fire the one officer who actually had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, but he fired all four. Now, regarding the mayor's comment about this officer needs to be in jail, it's the policy of the police department that when police officers see one of their peers doing something inappropriately or illegal, to intervene, to take action. What really should have happened is that one of those officers should have arrested him right on the scene, because that's the kind of response that their policy dictates. Even if he was just, he had his knee on his neck for minutes. After the first few seconds, one of those other officers should have said, hey, man, you got to take your knee off his neck. Let's put him in the car. Let's do something else other than what you're doing. And if he would have refused, he should have been arrested right then and there. So this is something we need to start seeing across this country, that police officers take action against their own when they see excessive force, when they see corruption, and don't wait for the prosecutor to make a decision. Take action. You have the authority to make the arrest if it's necessary. And this was one of those cases where it was absolutely necessary because we had someone lose a life.
Well, Neill, you being former law enforcement, I have to ask you, have you ever seen an instance where that has happened, where out in the field, a cop is doing something harmful to a person and another officer intervenes and either stops that officer from doing a harmful action or even arrest them? I mean, I've never even heard of such a thing. Have you, or have you seen it?
It is rare. I have seen it in my career. So when I first started in policing with the state police in Prince George's County, I think some of you may know about the reputation of the Prince George's County Police Department, especially going back into the 1970s. And one of the first things I was told when I got to the College Park Barrack was that you may run into a time or you may see something of, and they were quite blunt. Prince George's County police officers are known for using excessive force. If you make an arrest of someone and the Prince George's County police officer or officers arrive on the scene, you protect the person you arrest, you protect the person you're dealing with, and you get them out of there and away from there as soon as possible. I've seen a couple of officers intervene back then in preventing Prince George's County police officers from using inappropriate maneuvers, excessive force. Even recently, there are some rare occasions when police officers have intervened. It's now the policy of the Baltimore Police Department for that to happen. I don't know if we're going to see it yet or anytime soon, but it is now their policy as it was in New Orleans. it is also the policy in Minneapolis, and that's why those 3 officers were fired immediately by the chief up there. It does happen, but it doesn't. We don't need for it to be extremely rare. We need for it to be extremely popular and happening every time there is misconduct, every time there's a use of excessive force. And if we get to that place, so we can get some officers just to have some backbone, to have some courage and step forward when need be, we could put an end to this quickly. It's a challenge. Officers are ousted. Officers are treated in a very, how can I say it? Their lives are put at risk because they do intervene. And in some cases, like with a couple of officers here in Baltimore City, one particular detective, he was run out of town. He's now down in Florida.
Andrew Corkery, we're going to take a look at this video of footage of the uprisings in Minneapolis. It's taken by the outlet Unicorn Riot. Shout out to Unicorn Riot, because they are really on the front lines of things happening in that region of the country. They were out there for the Dakota Access pipeline protests in support of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe when that was happening. So Unicorn Riot was out in the streets interviewing people during the uprisings last night in Minneapolis. And some of the footage that we're about to see, gang, is a little bit graphic. So just a heads up there. It's about 2-ish, 3-ish minutes. And when we come back, Andrew, I want to get your reaction. Let's take a look at that.
Now is the time for that change, man. People are sick and tired, not just here in Minneapolis, but people are up here from all around. It's an international thing, man. We got to make this global. The change needs to be now. Because Donald Trump, Joe Biden, those ain't the answers. So something's going to pop. It's going to be a long summer. It's going to be a thick winter. We're going into some seasons. So this is a new norm. Get used to the shit we on here, because we out here. Real shitty. Commentary right there, my man. They just saw fam in the face with the gas pellet. That's what they on. They don't care about us. That's inhumane. They don't care. This is an inhumane practice. These people, it's a lack of humanity. It's not even about racism. It's not even about capitalism. It's not even about colonialism. It's about a lack of humanity, man. We have a lack of humanity in society in general. And I show my face. I'm out here. I ain't got nothing. Let me know what it is, bro. This where I'm from. I'm from this and that. So, man, we have no humanity for each other, man. So all this shit is a consequence. I feel bad because these is businesses, but this, man, it is what it is. Put your money where your outfit is. When you come back, when they buzz your insurance, let's see what your model look like after that. Every one of these is gonna get recouped with insurance. Every business got insurance on here, so this is capitalism at its finest. These people ain't gonna take no losses. That police department's gonna come back with more officers, more shit. What are y'all gonna do though then though? It's time though. It ain't about no carry, conceal and carry. It's about what we gonna do with the guys. Is we gonna have to change. We have to abolish the police. We have to change the narrative, man. We can no longer have a lot of the systems we have, man. I ain't got all the answers, man, but get involved, man.
So we edited part of that video, but in the edited version, the police, it appeared as though one of the protesters was actually struck in the face with a projectile fired by cops, and the person was screaming in just agony from being hurt in that way. Andrew, what is your take on what you've been seeing happening in the streets of Minneapolis and in other cities, and how the police have been responding naturally, heavy-handedly in riot gear with tear, with projectiles, but they weren't this way with the Reopen Minneapolis folks, with the Reopen the Economy folks. Let me get your opinions here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just shows that there's a real clear racial and class divide in terms of how law enforcement is utilized in this country and what it's utilized for. And, you know, when you go to upper middle class white communities, you know, people view law enforcement as a protection force against other people, against other things in society. But it's not a protection force for people of color, and it's not a protection force for lower income communities. And so what you're seeing is you're seeing, you know, a long-standing issue of generations kind of compounding again and again and again. and we're doing nothing to structurally solve any of the issues that have created this crisis. And what I'll say is, particularly in response to that video, is that when you look at the way that America has functioned for years, there's been a layer of relative stability, particularly for white and upper middle class individuals. And I think that when people see, the rioting and stuff and the looting like that's occurring, and rightfully so, because of the fact that none of these structural issues are being dealt with, people get scared because they don't have any context. They don't have any relationship to these communities. They don't understand what these communities are going through. So to them, it just seems like abject, violence for no apparent reason. But what we have to continue to do is we have to continue to explain the structural issues of why this is happening, and not allow people to pontificate about their own ideas as to why this is occurring, that generally go down in, with racist remarks and other things like that are completely not constructive in any manner. And so in that sense, some of the violence, if it's contextualized and understood, can be, constructed in such a way and understood so that, people can have a semblance of context of what these communities are going through. And America in general has experienced such a level of stability in relation to, income levels and other issues. Even though we have such glaring inequality, the people at the top in America and the people in the upper middle class, they have experienced such a level of stability that they have no viewpoint, they have no frame of reference for understanding what minority communities and what poor communities in this country are going through, and they're going to see their stability infringed upon as these situations keep occurring and as we keep, not dealing with these structural problems.
Neill Franklin, we have a question for you in the comments from Black Magic. Black Magic, regular viewer, friend of the show. We appreciate you, baby. They ask, are the fired officers still entitled to their pensions?
Most police departments have policy that if you're fired for something like this, that you're not entitled to your pension. So hopefully that's the policy of the Minneapolis Police Department, but I can't speak to that specifically. I would assume that they are not getting pensions for this. No. Now here's, of course, the challenge is going to be here comes the union. They're going to defend them. They're going to provide attorneys for them. They're going to fight to get their jobs back, and the community has to be in tune to this and have to do whatever they can to organize to ensure that they do not get their jobs back. Something else that needs to happen is we need a national database, tracking database of officers who are fired for misconduct, who are fired for excessive force, and have stipulations, have law that prevents them from being hired anywhere else across the country as a certified police officer. That's what we need to fight for.
I cannot disagree with that. That was amazing. That was actually the first time I think I have ever heard anyone connected with law enforcement in any way make that argument. So absolutely big respect to you for that, Neill Franklin. But to Andrew's comment, I want to make just one correction. What's happening in these uprisings is property damage. That's not violence. Violence is what law enforcement does to the bodies of Black, brown, poor, Latino, Native people on a regular basis in this country and have done for centuries. That's violence. Smashing some windows, graffitiing a building, taking, because I hate the word looting, taking merchandise from a store, that's property damage. And the reason property damage is equated with violence in these instances is because the capitalists want you to feel sorry for them. What the brother in the video was saying, he made an excellent point. He said all of these stores, they have insurance. They're not going to lose a dime, and they're not. They have insurance coverage. They're going to be able to recoup whatever losses they had, and they'll be able to reopen their businesses. But the people who received that $1,200 check, they in the midst of a pandemic, when unemployment is nearly 40%, what do they have? They have nothing. They have absolutely nothing on top of the violence that is committed against them by law enforcement. Then you've got the political violence that's committed against them through various laws that make it even more difficult for them to survive on a regular basis outside of the pandemic. So, the capitalist class wants the working class to feel ashamed for rising up against the oppression from the capitalist class. And that's the reason they always equate property damage with violence, because to them, property is more important than people. So, us destroying a store, breaking a window, that's violence against them, and we should be ashamed of ourselves. But no, that's what we're talking about is property damage in the midst of this uprising. The violence is what precipitated the uprising that people are sick of.
Speaking of violence, Jackie, and this is for the whole panel, when we see these uprisings happen, we hear this sort of familiar vein of critique that talks about protests need to be peaceful. And why are these people damaging stores and businesses in their own neighborhoods? And this is not the way to get this done, to achieve our ends of justice for the slain. It smacks of respectability, in my opinion. I would like to get y'all's take on that. Neill, let's hear from you first. What about the role of peaceful protests or non-peaceful protests at this point? Because our foremothers and fathers did protest peacefully, non-violently, for a very long time, and they were met with violence. And I feel now that the aggrieved community, the communities who have been attacked and murdered and maligned by police and law enforcement, feel like, maybe it's our turn to strike first with the violence in response to the violence that we have been enduring for so long. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you led off with the video of Martin Luther King, who clearly said that, when people feel they're not being heard, the riot becomes their voice to ensure that they're being heard. When they do break windows, when they do destroy businesses, they get heard. The media comes out. It's a response of frustration to the violence that has been inflicted upon Blacks and people of color in this country for centuries. And it's obvious that nothing is being done. And as long as we continue down this road of no response, no remedy, and the police continue to are giving carte blanche to continue this type of behavior, yes, you're going to continue to get this type of response. So when we start having concrete solutions to where we start seeing a dramatic decline in the use of excessive force, when we start seeing police chiefs firing police officers, when we start seeing their peers holding each other accountable, you know what? You'll stop seeing riots. It's just that simple. Change. Create the change that is meaningful so that you see the results, you feel the results, and the riots will stop. But if you fail to do that, if you fail to meet the expectations of the people, then the riots will continue. It's just that simple. This isn't rocket science.
Jackie or Andrew, I feel like when these uprisings happen, gang, I feel like almost the police kind of like it, right? Like this gives them a reason to pull out the tanks, right? And the MRAPs and all the cool militaristic shit. That's right. That the Obama administration broke them off with, and the Bush administration broke them off with. Like, oh, y'all, we get to pull out the tanks. The N-words is out there wilding. Let's take the tanks for a twirl.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is interesting is that we keep repeating the same the same admonitions that came from Dr. King. I mean, later on in Dr. King's great Riot is the Language of the Unheard comments, that's actually part of a longer interview that he did with Mike Wallace CBS on 60 Minutes back in 65, I think it was. Mike Wallace asked Dr. King, look, we've had this has been a long, hot summer with all of these riots. How much more of this do you think we're going to see? And this connects to what the young brother just said also in the video, because the young brother said, look, we're going to be out here. This is going to be some seasons. And Dr. King said this, I have to read it because I want people to understand how long we've been telling America that this is what you need to do. If you don't like riots so much, this is what you need to do. Dr. King said to Mike Wallace, asking him, how many summers like this do you imagine that we can expect? Dr. King said, I think the answer about how long it will take will depend on the federal government, on the city halls of our various cities, and on white America to a large extent. This is where we are at this point. This was in 65. And I think white America will determine how long it will be and which way we go in the future. We keep telling folks the same thing. And white people really just don't want to do it. This is clear and obvious now. And in regard to, these uprisings being an excuse for law enforcement to use the toys that every administration has given them, we should never rule out the involvement of agent provocateurs in legitimate uprisings. Never, because there have already been accounts on Twitter of people setting fire to buildings, and when they're chased away, they run into a police station. I mean, and it's not like we can discount a police department that would send phalanx of officers to protect the home of a murderer, of a murdering police officer, because that's what they did in Minnesota last night. It is not outside of the realm of possibilities that a police department that will protect a murdering cop would not also cause some of the great property damage that the same police department will now turn around and say, well, like you guys said, got to bring out the big guns now because they're losing their minds. We got to put them back in their place and regain control and law and order. Never underestimate the same police departments that would sanction murder of citizens will also cause some of the problems that they claim they're trying to control.
And I'll just add to that too, real quick. I mean, there was a report in The Intercept by Lee Fong just like a couple weeks ago talking about the direction in which the government is going to continue to go in. It's agreed to purchase all of these new weaponized vehicles for police departments and for the National Guard and for the Army and all these different things. So they're doubling down on the policy that they've been doubling down on for over 60 years or more. Since, Martin Luther King made that comment. I mean, 55 or so years ago since he made that comment, Jacqueline, but obviously this stuff has been going on for way longer than that. And it's just indicative of the fact that the federal government and the people in charge do not recognize, the language of the unheard. They'd rather put on their earmuffs and not listen to it and just continue investing, money into the militarized police infrastructure that has been part and parcel of the suppressive nature of this system to begin with. So, I mean, they're just repeating along the cycle that's already been occurring for decades and decades. And I think that it is going to take, genuine action, like you guys are talking about, of people continuing to stay out and not letting this, this season of riots and this season of protests, legitimate protests against the inaction of the state and against the inaction of the majority of white people in this country for not dealing with the structural issues that are at play.
Speaking of the reaction of the federal government, Donald Trump weighed in on the incident with George Floyd, and he tweeted about it. Let's pull up those tweets, Dwayne. This is what Trump had to say. Now, believe him at your own risk, because we know Trump is 100% full of shit. 100% of the time, right? But this is what he said. At my request, the FBI and Department of Justice are already well into an investigation as to the very sad and tragic death in Minnesota of George Floyd. He continues, I have asked for this investigation to be, I can't read that because it cuts off, but he says he gratefully appreciates all the work done by local law enforcement, and his heart goes out to George's family and friends. Justice will be served. This is from Mr. Law and Order himself, Donald Trump. Yeah. Now, in my opinion, this just seems
those
like a
police unions are going to be calling up. They're going to be calling in.
What a joke.
Well, yes. I mean, but this to me seems like a very transparent way. I mean, obviously, we are in an election cycle. Donald Trump, in his mind, believes that he has a shot with a significant enough portion of the Black electorate to possibly, tip the election in his favor. If all other cheating methods fail, he thinks he can siphon off, a decent number of Black votes from Joe Biden. And that's what this kind of feels like to me, because I don't think Donald Trump really gives a shit. But I mean, for him to invoke the FBI and DOJ in this, which already has a bit of a shaky record on these types of incidents, Neill, I want to go to you on this. I mean, how much confidence do you have, or at least in your experience, have you seen the FBI, Department of Justice, get involved and actually do something that results in a favorable outcome, bending towards the arc of justice in these types of incidents?
To be honest with you, I don't see the FBI really making an impact in this particular case, as we've seen in the past. This is all going to be handled at the state level as it relates to any criminal charges. What we will see at the federal level are civil suits for violation of constitutional rights. But I don't have a lot of confidence in this administration's Department of Justice. And of course, we all know he's part of the problem. He's a big part of the problem. And it's just a political move to try to get more Blacks to vote for him. That's it. Don't worry about DOJ unless we're talking about the civil suits that are going to come. Hopefully, the DA there, Mr. Freeman, is going to do what he's done in the past. For instance, he charged and convicted one police officer for kicking a suspect, police officer who kicked the suspect in the face when he was down on his hands and knees. But he's also been a little impotent in other areas, but he's demonstrated that he has no problem with charging police officers. Let's get on it. Let's get on it quick. Doesn't take a whole lot of time to make a decision to put this guy in jail, and the other ones too, because you can charge the other ones too. They all should be criminally charged.
Jackie, I was surprised that Trump even acknowledged this incident. I was surprised that he even bothered to say anything about it on Twitter. I mean, this is way out of his wheelhouse, injustices against Black people. I mean, he's usually on the other side, pro-cop, right? For him to even express condolences was surprising.
No, Mr. Circus Carnival Barker. No, I knew he was going to say something. I mean, I knew it was going to be just a ridiculous crock of shit also. But I mean, it's amazing how he uses this horrible lynching, because that's what this was, to politicize this lynching to appeal to Black folks. It was so incredibly transparent. But at the same time, he says in the tweet, local law enforcement, I want to thank local law enforcement for their great work. But then he says, my heart goes out to the George Floyd. Local law enforcement killed George Floyd. So what great work are you talking about? This, I mean, every time I think I can, my hatred for that man can't go any lower. And all of the people around him, I just don't understand why somebody does not take any device that allows him to tweet on it. It just the lack of, I'm beginning to think that they're not even human anymore. And I just, it's not a surprise. But again, just the political aspect of it. Yeah, he will appeal to those like 6 Black Republicans who really like him and Candace Owens. That's pretty much it. Everybody else, sees quite plainly and clearly what and who he is, and what those tweets were about. He doesn't give a shit about the family or George Floyd or actual justice. He doesn't know what justice is. It's just Trump being Trump on a different day. That's it.
Yeah, and I think that this is typical of what Trump does when he confronts himself with a reality in which the politics of his particular party and the politics of his base are at odds with what the issue is comporting to tell society at the time. So I think this is what he does. He kind of tries to turn the narrative on his head and try to, take some weird semblance of what he might think is like a high road or something where he can, allow himself to give some morality to people of color in order to try to get some votes on the edges of what's going on here. So I think that this is pretty typical of what Trump does, but in actuality, like you guys are both saying, the policies that he's enacting are reflective of a completely different reality. And he's trying to, with his tweets, as he usually does, is create his own alternative universe, where he has, his alternative facts. So, I mean, this is another example of him and Kellyanne Conway's alternative facts about how to deal with police brutality in America.
Speaking of police brutality, Donald Trump's one of his how can I put this, pet projects, maybe, so to speak. Let's do a little throwback here from when Donald Trump addressed a gathering of law enforcement, and here's what he told them.
And when you see these towns, and when you see these thugs being thrown into the back of a paddy wagon, you just see them thrown in, rough. I said, please don't be too nice. Like when you guys put somebody in the car and you're protecting their head, the way you put their hand over. Like, don't hit their head, and they've just killed somebody, don't hit their head. I said, you can take the hand away, okay?
Innocent until proven guilty, constitutional rights, civil rights, fuck them people, throw them in the back of the police car, beat them upside the head, smack them around. We don't care. We don't care.
Yeah.
Listen, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was going to say what he really should have said was, why don't we take the hand and the mask off of this naked, racist, capitalist system that we have here, and let me just show you what I really think about y'all. Because that's basically what he's saying when he says, let's don't worry about their head, and you guys can do what you want. You're doing a great job. It is in such stark contrast to what Trump said in that tweet. It's almost giving me whiplash just thinking about it. It's insane.
What was most disturbing about that clip to me was the response of the officers that were there. Says a lot. Says a whole lot. And I just got to mention one name: Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray, thrown in the back of a paddy wagon, roughly, and he died.
I mean,
that's our president, folks.
And honestly, there was no way for people who live in communities that are like where I live over in Southeast DC, and the overwhelming police presence over here, where the cops don't respect you on a good day. I'm not even kidding. I mean, if you can just go on about your business, get half of them who are just out posted up on any corner patrolling to even acknowledge your presence in a pleasant way, that's doing something. But to see this video of all of these cops applauding and cheering what this man said about abusing people who are allegedly, under the so-called sacred Constitution, innocent until proven guilty in a court of law and by a jury of our peers. But according to him and all the cops who applauded, they are the judge, jury, and executioner on the spot. how do we look at that and not come away with, I told you this is how they are? And people just keep not believing that this is how the police are in our communities to us. And then they're surprised when uprisings like this happen after the police yet again murder a citizen. It boggles my mind just how much effort people put into not giving a shit about other people's lives.
This clip too, just real quick, is illustrative of Trump's overarching worldview on people of color generally, when it comes to his dealing with people in the global south, in droning people to death in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And he's made similar remarks to the CIA and the military and other people. He's made remarks saying that, basically, we need not care about these people because we're there doing our job. And if they get in our way, then, that's their problem. That's basically his whole overarching worldview. So this is his direct, visceral nature towards the African-American community is unique in and of itself, but it's an extension of a broader worldview in which he sees white people, and particularly the white American political class, and Republicans even more particularly, as the overarching leaders of society, and be damned anyone else who gets in our way.
Speaking of people getting in the way, at least 2 of the 4 officers who were fired as a result of the murder of George Floyd had been involved in incidents involving police brutality in the past. I'm sure this comes as a surprise to no one. Travis Geddes from Raw Story reported upon this, where the officer, Derek Chauvin, I hope I'm saying his name right, he was the one who had the knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd. He had been involved in at least 12 incidents, or he had at least 12 complaints against him where there was no discipline taken against him. One of the other officers, Officer Tao, was actually sued in 2017, as reported by Raw Story. The lawyer representing the victim says that Officer Tao, and I'm going to read verbatim, in that case, a man claims that he was stopped by Tao and another officer while walking with his pregnant girlfriend. And he says the officers punched, kicked, and kneed his face and body. And the man and his lawyer sued. The suit was later settled out of court. Neill, we've had this kind of discussion before here on Stir Crazy, where, I'm working for the Real News, and I do something that causes the Real News to get sued for $250,000. Now, if I cost my job $250,000, chances are they're going to show me the door.
You're going. Hit the door.
But if you're a cop, you can beat people for years. Get sued. Let the city pay out thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of dollars, and still get to keep your badge and all the perks that goes along with law enforcement. How is this a thing? Why is this the thing?
All right. Pay attention. This is speed round here. We need some actionable things. I know there are a lot of people who want pretty much to abolish the police, the abolition of police. That's not going to happen anytime soon, but what can we do? We can at least be moving to community-controlled policing. And what I'm talking about I'm not talking about review boards after something tragic has happened. I'm talking about control over our police departments, controlling the budget, hiring and firing the police chief, controlling the philosophy of how they police or how they act and conduct their business within your community, within your neighborhood. Now, there's some things that we can be asking for, demanding right away. So our police chiefs and sheriffs, this is a challenge to them. And our community should be forcing them to do these things that I'm about to mention. Number one, you mentioned millions of dollars from lawsuits coming from the taxpayers' pockets. Well, how about if we required certified police officers to have their own liability insurance? We, the citizens, the police department, will pay for your basic premium. Now, when you get sued because you do something that you shouldn't have done, any increase in your premium is on you. If the insurance carrier drops you, then we have to terminate you because you don't have liability insurance. And if no other insurance carrier picks you up, just like with your auto insurance, when you can't drive, then you can't become a police officer. That's one way to get rid of folks. The other thing that we can be requiring our police chiefs to do, as we're trying to do in Annapolis, is transparency into police personnel files. So we talked about the number of cases, the number of suits involving these police officers, use of force, excessive force, and they have not been held accountable. Now, in most police departments in states across this country, we the people do not have access to personnel records involving misconduct, involving corruption, involving citizens' complaints, and just other issues, behavioral issues with these police officers. We need that transparency in order for us, the people, to be able to control how our police departments operate and how they're run. So those are just a couple of things that could be done. I got a whole list of things that are really doable, but we the people have to force our police leaders and our mayors and other officials to move that policy forward. We have to do it in an organized manner where we can hold folks accountable for when they fail to do what we demand of them.
Andrew,
that's the language. That's the language right there.
Yeah. I just had a quick question for Neill, just real quick. You were talking about before, like, you know, the relationship to the police pensions and like what the policy is on officers who engage themselves in such, you know, aggressive forms of misconduct in which they, you know, don't receive their pension. And I just had a question, like, there's a lot of right wingers and a lot of people, particularly like, you know, older white Americans who kind of like look at taking away their pension as like affecting like that individual's family, who in their minds have, you know, haven't done anything through any fault of their own. And I was just trying to find out, like, what's your kind of critique of that argument, or what you think, you know, is a good response to that argument that we can't take away their pension because it would affect, you know, their family and things like that.
Okay, then put forth policy like we're requiring of other working Americans, where there's no state pension or city pension, and 401ks. Okay, have their own personal retirement plans. That's something that we can do. You know, in that way, then that person's responsible, and if they get fired, they still have their 401k. All right, we can do that. But, you know, there's one other thing that I think is important, and that these police chiefs and police leaders can do, and that is, in addition to, you know, I mentioned the database and tracking, I mentioned the transparency and so on. Police unions, as we all know, is a very big problem. And if you read the Washington Post article, I think it came out today or yesterday, regarding where one of the police chiefs, I think from Houston, said that in many cities across the country, police chiefs can't do what Chief Arredondo did, and that was an immediate termination because of the contracts that prohibit police chiefs from firing police officers. We're like that here in the state of Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. And what we need to do then is revisit those contracts, and we need to make those changes. If it has to happen in Annapolis, then make it happen in Annapolis. But again, we have to hold their feet to the fire in a consistent way. And we do this by voting or not voting for someone. And that's how you get the change that you want. Or organize to put the right person into these critical political positions. And then we'll get what we want. But we have to do it earnestly. We have to do it in a very strong, organized way. And we have to be very consistent about it from year to year. But we definitely need to do those things.
But Neill Franklin, you know, I feel as though both Republican and Democratic politicians are so pressed to show how chummy they are with law enforcement, how much they support police. And I mean, we've seen this time again here. You said state of Maryland. I mean, what's his name? Hogan. and then O'Malley, and then, Glendenning and Ehrlich and all these people, they want to wrap their arms around the cops just to show them that they are a friend to the police. And for politicians who might offer a challenge to cops, I'm thinking about Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby. Oh my God, they gave that poor woman the blues. And I'm not 100% fan of Ms. Mosby, but out of, numerous state's attorney before her, she was the only one to actually step up and charge police for their misdeeds and for their brutality. It seems dangerous in a way for these politicians to oppose the police outright, because there is consequence for that.
So you mentioned Marilyn Mosby. She does it, and she doesn't do it, to be controversial. And she does it because she feels that it's right, and she's still in office. So it can be done. I'm not 100% supporter of her either. I'm about 90%. Okay. But here's the thing. These things that I'm mentioning, you are showing support for the police. You're showing support for those police officers who want to take their profession to the next and to the next and to the highest of all professional levels. Those are the police officers that you will be supporting. Those are the ones that you will be embracing. Those are the ones that you want working in your neighborhoods. So you know what? If the other 30% have heartburn with it, the ones who are running the unions, and they quit or they're fired or whatever the case may be to get them out, so be it. And then what you're left with are the ones that truly want to serve.
And let me add really quickly, another thing that we need to advocate for in a real tangible change in how every, not just local law enforcement police department is run, but also every security force, every school resource department,
Absolutely.
every campus police, is the ending of the 1033 program. The 1033 program is the National Defense Authorization Act, which sells or sometimes just gives surplus military equipment to law enforcement offices, not just cops, but like I said, school resource offices, campus police offices, other kinds of security forces that are not necessarily police. So the tanks that you saw on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, and some of the equipment that was used in Minnesota last night came from the Department of Defense. Through the 1033 program, weapons that are used in combat in the theater of war are used against American citizens who are standing up for their rights against police repression in this country. So the ending of the 1033 program is critical to an end to getting to an end to oppressive policing. But also, I want to bring up the political connection that is in the fact that these cops have been involved in other incidents of police brutality and police killings. And this is where Amy Klobuchar and voting comes in, because I'm getting a lot of people talking about, well, this is why you have to vote for the right people, and this is why Black people have to vote. No, this incident explains why some Black people don't vote. Because the cop who had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, he was one of a dozen cops that Amy Klobuchar did not convict of all manner of abuses against people when she was district attorney in Minnesota. This is why Black people don't vote, because now this woman is on the short list to be vice president under Joe Biden. You think Biden didn't know about her record? Sure he did. I don't think that man is as stupid as people are making him out to be. If he is, then I don't think all these people who are on his campaign didn't know, especially since it was brought up during the debates. So anyone in the Democratic Party, and especially if these people are Black, who did not immediately see her name on that short list of VP candidates and said, no, not that one, not her. We are not going to get her past this. She can't be on this list. Anybody who greenlit that woman being on this short list of candidates for vice presidents, and then for vice president for Joe Biden, and then turn around and shame Black people for not wanting to vote for him or for anybody in this system. Are you serious? We live under the policies of Democrats and Republicans who allow people in uniform to kill us and get away with it. And then the same people are elevated to a higher position of vice president to influence national policy, and we're supposed to vote? You don't think that the people who are angry in Minneapolis are angry for that reason too, that they have been fed this two-party system with the same evil politicians cycling in and out at all levels, and they're told that the reason they can't get better is because they don't vote? We have got to do better than this. And we have got to stop shaming Black people who live in these communities and Latinos and Native people and poor white people who live in these pockets of oppression. We've got to stop shaming them for not wanting to participate in the system that oppresses them.
Hey, I'm gonna let y'all go real shortly here. There's a comment that our social media folks have suggested that I ignore, and I probably should, but I think it warrants an answer. Because I think the person doesn't fully understand the question themselves. So this is from Ballsacking Harry. Ballsacking Harry says, question for the panel and the chat. Would you be as angry if a white man was killed? Would you rally to his aid as so many Americans have towards Mr. Floyd's situation, trying to understand Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter? Well, sir, Ballsacking Harry, my question to you is, when was the last time you saw the police called on a white man and a cop felt so threatened, I suppose, by this white male who was allegedly trying to pass a fake $20 bill to put his knee on the neck for 5 minutes? When was the last time you saw a white child accosted in the way that Trayvon Martin was for simply walking back to his house? When was the last time you saw a white child brutally killed within seconds of encountering police like Tamir Rice was in Ohio for having a BB gun, which he was completely within his rights to have in an open carry state such as Ohio? You have to understand, white people don't get the same shit that Black people get from the police. Never have, never will. So do white people get shot by the police? Does it happen? It absolutely does. There was a white man who was shot and killed in his house in Montgomery County, Maryland, not even 2-3 months ago. It barely made a blip on the news. I saw it. And his family was trying to make a stink about it, and they have every right to. But the thing is, if these types of incidents happen to white people more, sure, white people should get real pissed off about it. But from where I sit, like the folks out in Oregon, what was this, guys, maybe 2 or 3 years ago? I think it was the Bundys, where they actually, right, they took over part of a federal preserve and told the federal police to get the fuck out, okay? And they was armed, and the police allowed them to play this G.I. Joe shit and didn't kill them. They lived. I do think one of them did get killed, but that's because they were engaging with the cops in a firefight. So duh. But I'm going to let the panel respond to that, because there's a lot of, I think, intentional misunderstanding about why Black people are so pissed off when this happens to us very frequently, and why perhaps the same outrage isn't there when it happens to white people very much infrequently. Jackie, I'll let you. Actually, no, Andrew, let's leave with you, Andrew. Andrew, get in here. Come on.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say to all my white people out there, when these incidents happen to white people, it is something to be angry about, and it is it is a injustice thrusted upon white people, okay? But that said, it is not part of a broader, overarching, systemic, political system that fundamentally suppresses Black people and people of color in this country. So that context is not added into this. There could be a class component, you can argue, when these things occur to white individuals, which I think that you should. But when we're talking about the issues affecting the Black community, the white incidents don't fall in that context because they're not part of the overarching systematic, racialized system of apartheid that we have in America. So that's the context that viewer needs to understand when trying to apply incidents of police brutality to white individuals that numerically are just not as emphatic and not as large in their numbers as what happens to people in the Black community.
Yeah, I mean,
to add to Andrew, well said. First of all, Andrew,
thanks.
The data definitely supports everything you're saying, not just when it comes to police action within the Black community and the rates of encounters with police officers and the rate of the use of excessive force. You know, when you're talking about white folks who are killed, it's usually, as Andrew said, it's usually a class issue. It's a mental health issue, something along those lines. But in the Black community, it's just a Black issue. It doesn't matter how much money you have, how much money you don't have, your mental state of being, or any of that. It is primarily about your skin color. Blacks in this country, from a criminal justice perspective, are arrested at much higher rates than whites. We are convicted at much higher rates, usually around 3 to 1. We serve longer sentences at also much higher rates than our white counterparts. But it's not just about the criminal justice system. The data also reflects the same as it relates to health in this country for Black folks. Living conditions, education, at every single turn in this country, in every community, in every neighborhood, Blacks are at the bottom of that scale. During COVID-19, who's getting hit the hardest, not just health-wise, but also in the loss of jobs? Black folks. So, you know, when talk about Black Lives Matter, yes, I am talking about lives being lost at the hands of the police, but I'm also talking about life in general, you know, being able to just live healthy and to prosper at some level. Blacks in this country, again, are at the very bottom of that scale.
Jacqueline Luqman with the last word. Take us home, Jackie.
So here's why white people have a problem with Black Lives Matter and the anger we express at people being murdered by police. And by the way, Black Lives Matter as an organization, formally or even loosely, have indeed protested on behalf of Native people killed by police, who are actually killed by police at a higher percentage than Black people, and on behalf of Latino and white people killed by police. So don't come with this bullshit about, will you be just as angry if white people are killed by police? Yeah, we don't want anybody killed by the police. That's the whole point. But because Black people and Native people are disproportionately killed by the police who are not armed, that is the huge difference. The data also shows that most white people who are killed by the police are not only armed, but they are acting in a threatening manner towards someone else. Black people and Native people who are killed by the police are not. The data shows that. You can be mad at that all you want to, but those are the facts. But here's why white people have a problem with this, and it really goes to white America's love of law enforcement, and it comes from the origins of policing, because it comes from the slave patrols, and people think of slave patrols as like this one group of a posse of white men with, you know, that have been appointed with, you know, horses and guns. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the entire white population of slave-holding states and many northern states were deputized to assist the slave patrols. And they had the authority to stop and question every Black person they encountered, ask them for their papers, and if they didn't produce their papers, then your random white citizen could detain Black folks and wait for the slave patrols to come or take them to the sheriff's office or wherever, so that that random Black person could be turned back in to some plantation, whether they were free people or not. So this is the basis for white America's love of law enforcement when it comes to us, because their sense of belonging, their sense of authority, their sense of Americanness and specialness is derived in the authority they were given when they were deputized to catch runaway slaves and help the slave patrols keep us in our place. You don't have to like that either, but that's also the history. So people who have a problem with Black Lives Matter and our anger at the continued oppression that we experience from law enforcement, we don't have time to keep explaining this to you. We have to fight for our freedom. And either you're going to be like those allies who are out there kicking those tear gas cans back at the cops, then you need to go somewhere and lick your wounds, because we got work to do.
Jackie, you just dropped some bombs on them right there. And shoot, you talk about the history of white people randomly approaching Black people, asking them for their papers and whereabouts. Where you, girl, are they still doing it? They have done it to me so many times I can't even count. And please don't think just because we're in the 21st century that them 18th century tactics are still not very much in vogue with a significant portion of the white population. But woo, what a great show. I like to thank our fantastic panel, Jacqueline Luqman, Neill Franklin, Andrew Corkery. Thank you all for your wonderful insight and perspective, and Jackie dropping historical bombs.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Neill.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, and this was a great panel.
And thanks to everyone in the comments and the chat. We know there's some trolls. We know there's some race baiting trolls in the chat.
They out there.
Y'all getting with them. And getting them up out of the paint. So we appreciate all of our viewers. So thank you again. Again, this is brought to you by the Real News Network. And we will see you for tomorrow's episode of Stir Crazy. Y'all take care.